Hello and welcome to this, which is a first look video at the latest version of Ubuntu Studio, which is Ubuntu Studio 21.04 Hirsute Hippo. But just before we go any further into video, I would just like to give a shout out to Nobil KWT, I think that's how you pronounce his name on YouTube, who in my last video on Ubuntu Studio 20.10 simply commented with a command that should be able to allow me to run my virtual machine at, the desired resolution of 1080p. Now currently, as you might be able to see from the screen picture I have here, this is running on a virtual machine. And as you can see, it is running on 1080p. Unfortunately, the solution he gave, although it should work under most scenarios, didn't quite work this time around. What I ended up having to do is I had to install the VirtualBox guest editions. And then in the actual menu, not within the operating system, but actually within VirtualBox itself, I was able to tell it to make the virtual monitor the right size, and now it works. And so here we go, rather than having to have a zoomed in blurry mess that's actually 800 by 600 zoomed in, we're going to have a nice 1920 by 1080. Still, a thank you and a shout out to him. Or her. So just in case you're not aware, Ubuntu Studio is a special version of Ubuntu Linux which is designed primarily with creatives in mind. So this is musicians, video editors, artists, photographers, even, authors, illustrators, stuff like that. It isn't simply just Ubuntu with the creative packages pre-installed. They're actually pre-installed and pre-configured, as some things, such as jack audio, for example, can be quite fiddly to, get your head around, especially if you're not, used to doing stuff like this. And if you want to have a distribution or operating system that you just install and can just go ahead and run, and you need to get, creative work like this done, and this is a really good option for that, as you can just, install it and get on with your work. Now, if the last video you've watched on this has been about 20.04, which is the LTS version, not to be confused with this, which is 21.04, then you might notice that there's a big difference here as we've moved over from the XFCE desktop environment to the KDE Plasma desktop environment. I'm not really going to talk about that much in this video. I'm going to talk about it a little bit at the end. As you can see, this is a virtual machine, but I do actually have a proper install of Ubuntu Studio. We'll talk about that a little bit at the end of the video, but this is KDE Plasma. If you'd like to know a little bit more about that, then you should actually look at my videos I've done on Ubuntu Studio 20.10, because from this point on, it's all going to be KDE Plasma, I think, for the Ubuntu Studio are doing, at least as their mainline version. So that's what we're going to be looking at in these first look videos. So just before we go through all the list of the pre-installed programs, I'm just on Ubuntu Studio's website here, and this is the main sort of release notes page for Ubuntu Studio 21.04. And they even say here it's kind of like an incremental upgrade. There's only a couple of things that basically have just been upgraded to the latest package. Because unlike rolling release distributions such as Arch Linux, with Ubuntu you tend to have point releases every 6 months. And so that's when a lot of the programs and applications actually get upgraded rather than having security patches or minor incremental upgrades. This is where the larger upgrades will come into place. And 21.04 is pretty much, there's nothing hugely different here. A lot of it is just upgrading older packages, though there are a couple of new things. Here's a bit more of an in-depth release page on Ubuntu Studio's website. And if we scroll down, it goes a little bit more in depth. There tend to be a lot of audio-related releases over other things. It's just because, compared to other creative fields on computers, music tends to be very, very, very complicated. There will be plugins for other things, such as, graphic design or video editing, but in music, there's a lot of different things need to be upgraded and changed and fiddled with, and there's loads and loads and loads and loads of packages get installed. So audio tends to be put near the top as it's one of the things that is developed and worked on the most. Now, as I was saying before about how Ubuntu Studio, it's not just here's Ubuntu with some DAWs pre-installed. No, they actually do work on things such as the studio controls, which is meant to be a sort of like all-in-one way of managing all of your audio, be it audio interfaces, MIDI, inputs, outputs, everything like that. Routing everything so that one program can speak to X hardware or X hardware can speak to Y program or vice versa, anything like that. So that's quite an important thing that they develop themselves. We have Ardor 6.6 in here, which is a snapshot of 6.7, and it looks like, I think they're saying that, yeah, they will eventually be upgrading to 6.7. So as I said earlier, there sometimes are, over the course of a single version of Ubuntu Studio, there are actually like point releases and point upgrades of things here or there, and Ardor is the most popular free and open source digital audio workstation. and so that's why it does come pre-installed with Ubuntu Studio. I know I've asked this myself, I know a lot of other people ask it. Reaper, which is a very, very powerful proprietary digital audio workstation, that is available for Linux, and a lot of people do like to use it on Linux. And people tend to ask Ubuntu Studio why they don't package it with the distribution. I think there's like licensing issues and stuff like that as to why they can't, release it with the operating system. So instead you get Ardor, but if you'd like to use something like Reaper, there's nothing stopping you from downloading it and installing it yourself. I'm currently on a little bit of a journey, moving away from Pro Tools and actually messing around with a few different digital audio workstations, and I've been spending a lot of time at the moment in Ardor, which I quite like actually, although it's very Pro Tools-like, so if you're used to Pro Tools, you'll find Ardor to be a good place to start, but I'm looking into having a go at Reaper in the next few months, hopefully. A new program completely, or new application I should say, which is Argodejo, as I'm going to assume how to pronounce that, and if anyone who actually knows how to pronounce it can please comment in the comment section below to let me know if I have pronounced that at all, or if I've just butchered the name. Now this is just a audio session management tool. The previous one that was most common, or at least fairly popular, was Ray Sessions, but I know that different people have different preferences. I haven't messed around with it much, so in my review of this particular release, which is going to come in a few months' time, I'll have to see what that's like and then maybe bring it up if I tend to use it much. Other notable updates, yeah, like I said, it's just a lot of programs are just getting updates. Nothing hugely radical at the moment. OBS, which is what I'm currently using to record this on, very, very good tool, very, very useful tool for recording your screen. They've added in virtual webcam. I'm not exactly sure what that is, but if that sounds useful to you, then it's something that's pre-installed and pre-configured. And a brilliant thing about OBS, at least on Linux, is you boot it up and it gives you the option. Configure it for streaming, configure it for recording, which is what I set it to, and then configure it for virtual webcam. So if you're concerned about setting that up, it's startup, install wizard, whatever you want to call it for OBS, basically just handles it for you. Right, now that we're back in the virtual machine, let's have a quick run through of all the programs you get pre-installed with Ubuntu Studio 21.04. So if we click onto the menu here, you see that there are, if you're used to seeing KDE Plasma normally, you'll see there's quite a few more menu entries on here. That's a typical thing with Ubuntu Studio, where they tend to add in the audio production, graphic design, and video production sections, where you can even see that they even have subsections. They're very, very handy for quickly finding things. So let's go through that first. Under audio utilities, we have Kala and QJack Control. So that's to help you managing Kala and Jack, both are very, very useful tools with audio on Linux. Then we have effects, something you might notice from my last video when I had a different menu set up here showing every single application. If I open this now, we get all of these, and actually if you use like the launcher that has all the applications showing, you get all of these just everywhere. A hell of a lot of effects. This is one of the big upsides of Ubuntu Studio because, like I was saying before, in audio it's very, very, very complex and there's so many things you might or might not need. This gives you everything and the kitchen sink, as the old expression goes. So yeah, anything you need is probably in here, to be honest. And if not, you can normally download it and give it a go if there's a VST Linux version, or if not, give it a go on Wine. We have the Jack Auto Tuner here, we have Kala Plugin Host, we have Guitarix, which is a little like virtual amplifier you can use, a Jack audio mastering interface. Some more effects for specifically guitar, and a standalone Jack reverb, so I guess you could set up that to just add reverb to any Jack channel you're using at any point. If we go back into audio production, next we have instruments, and so this of course is going to be a load of virtual instruments such as an organ emulator. We've got a lot of synthesizers in here basically. Now, I've brought this up before, it's quite interesting, there are some drum plugins in here which never appear in the instrument sections for some reason. We'll be seeing those later. If we go into MIDI utilities, yep, we've got some like keyboards and stuff. Just general MIDI stuff, no pun intended there. Keyboards, synthesizers, other little effects like that. In mixers and card control, we have a few more specific mixers, and this also comes in handy if you have a particular sound card. For example, I know a lot of people have had problems with FireWire sound cards and audio interfaces, and they do have stuff like the FF-ADO mixer in here, and other stuff, just if you have some music hardware that's a little bit more exotic, shall we say, than the typical stuff like a Focusrite, for example, that a lot of people tend to have. If we go back into audio production now, we get Studio Controls, previously mentioned, is I think almost entirely maintained or partially maintained by the Ubuntu Studio team. Very, very useful tool. We have more monitoring here. We have Argodejo. I'm going to try it again to pronounce that. Ardor, obviously the digital audio workstation for Linux. We also have Audacity, which is, some people call it a digital audio workstation. It's kind of like a sound recorder. Very, very, very useful program. It's not overly fully featured. You wouldn't necessarily want to record an album with it, although in theory you could. But it's there, it's very, very useful. DG Edit, this is to do with Drum Gizmo, that drum plugin I'd previously mentioned. And we have Geon Kick here as well, which is a percussion synthesizer and hydrogen. So, you know, we have Drum Gizmo tends to simulate more real-life drums. So say if you wanted to record like a rock song and you wanted to have very, very realistic sounding drums, whereas, you know, drum synthesizers tends to work a little bit more if you're doing electronic music, stuff like that. Kid-free, this is an audio tagger. It's actually very, very useful for changing the tags on audio files. If when you go from one music player to another, it's not keeping the same information and data, you can just adjust it on here so it's the same across both. LMMS, which is another DAW. It's pretty cool. I almost feel like it's kind of like Logic, or it's kind of like the more MIDI, like electronic music side of using Logic, but in Linux, and it's free and open source. MuseScore, very, 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 very useful score editor. If you don't use it, or basically if you don't tend to use musical notation, you should absolutely try to learn. And this is a great tool to do it with because, you know, as you type things in or as you mess around with things, you can hit play and hear exactly what you've just written down be played back to you. So often I will go to use this over using other things. For example, I find it easier if I'm trying to program MIDI myself to score it out, to actually write it out on the notation and then export that as MIDI. And then put that through, you know, like a MIDI sequencer and get it to play, you know, send it through, say, like a piano plugin or an organ plugin, rather than trying to do it all through a DAW. But that's just to my own workflow. We've got a couple of other things here, like PetriFew and Pure Data, QJack control again. QTractor, which is it says multi-track sequencer, but basically it is another digital audio workstation. There are some YouTube channels that give a lot of love to QTractor, but I've never used it much simply because I would rather use a DAW that is cross-platform, as QTractor is only available on Linux, unless it's available on BSD as well, but I'm not too sure. Whereas something like Ardour is available on Linux as well as Windows and Mac, which just, you know, makes it a lot easier if you're working with other musicians who may or may not use Linux as well. Last few things, we've got Ray Session, that other audio session manager. Got a looper tool here. And we have a synthesizer. If we go into graphic design, under graphics utilities, we have a document scanner. Interesting enough, there's two document scanners here. I guess if one doesn't work, you could try the other one. Under photography here, we have Darktable, which is, I think that's like a pretty typical photography editor. If you've watched it in my previous videos, you'll know I'm not a photographer or a graphic designer. So I'm going to breeze over these the best I can. If I'm talking total rubbish, then please correct me in the comment section below when I'm talking about these. Digicam, which was brought in the last version of Ubuntu Studio, which is a KDE program for photo management. A lot of people, I've seen loads of people actually outside of like the creative sphere talking about this in their, you know, Linux apps to have kind of videos. So I guess it's probably quite good. I've never really used it myself. We've got like a photo downloader, stuff like that. Very, very, very useful, especially if you take loads of those pictures. Blender, which is a 3D modeler as well as a video editor. I hear it's very, very powerful. I've just always preferred to use other things. We've got an ebook viewer here, FontForge, which is just, you know, to view fonts you may or may not install. And a thing I do always bring up that I think a lot of people don't realize about Ubuntu Studio is if you want a lot of fonts, install Ubuntu Studio, or at least you can install its font package on other versions of Ubuntu. It just has loads of fonts. Really, really useful if you want to get, you know, a bit creative and you just want a bit of a wacky font. GIMP, the GNU image manipulation program, is basically the sort of free and open source world's equivalent to Photoshop. I like it very, very much. GPick, which is a very, very, very useful program. Literally, you open it up and then wherever you put your mouse, like over anything, it'll tell you exactly the color code for whatever the cursor is over. This is something that I think was new. Something to do with lenses or something. I don't know. Once again, correct me in the comments. Inkscape, which is for working with vector graphics, so that's graphics that can be stretched up and down without losing quality, so they sort of like, they like render themselves up and render down, very, very useful. Krita, which is a digital painting program. I know that some people prefer this to things like GIMP. LibreOffice Draw, part of the LibreOffice suite. We have an LRF viewer, I don't know what LRF is. Paint program, and Ocular, which is quite possibly the best PDF viewer ever, and I actually use it on Windows because I think it's that good. Then we have some pixel art and, you know, 2D vector animation kind of stuff. So if that's your cup of tea, if that's what you need to use, then Ubuntu Studio could be up your street. Into video production, a far smaller category here. Blender, as previously mentioned, even though it is a 3D modeler, it's also used for animation, so you can use it as a video editor. DVD, which will go with K3B here. You know, they're utilities for creating DVDs, CDs, and then actually just burning them. Kdenlive. My personal video editor of choice, very, very good video editor. OBS, like I said, is used for streaming and recording, very, very useful as well. A media converter here, which looks quite interesting. I've not tried that myself. I'm going to have a look at that. Slow-mo UI, subtitle editor, and XJdio, which I think is a part of or is normally installed alongside our DAW. Because if you are ever, composing, mixing, mastering music over film, you will need this to actually display, the film and actually have it set to being exactly at the same time because it uses Jack, so that things are all synced up nicely. Then we get to the other stuff that is less Ubuntu Studio related. We'll quickly go through those. It's under games, we've got some games here. We've got Sudoku, I'm really bad at Sudoku. And we have K-Mines, Minesweeper. I'm really bad at Minesweeper as well. I play games, I'm terrible at those kind of games. If they stuck Mahjong in there, that would be better. I like Mahjong. Under Internet, we have Firefox, which is, personally, in my opinion, the best web browser. KDE Connect, if you use that on your phone. Conversation, which is an IRC client, a BitTorrent client, and Thunderbird Mail, which is quite a nice email client if you like to use actual programs for email rather than just logging into the email on your web browser. Under Media Playback, we have Eliza, which is the default KDE music player. Very good music player too. VLC Media Player, which is that traffic cone you see on everyone's computer. As the old saying goes, if VLC can't open it, then you're in trouble. Basically, it's very, very good for watching any kind of video format or opening up any kind of audio format. And if another video player or music player is having trouble opening it, there is normally a good chance VLC will open it as well. Another great feature about VLC that I like is the ability to speed up and slow down music without really changing the pitch. That's very, very useful. And the last things are Voco Screen NG and XJdio again. And under Office, we have some, programs for ebooks, if that's your cup of tea. We have the full LibreOffice suite. Very, very, very useful free and open source Office suite. Ocular is appearing again, once again, a fantastic PDF viewer. We have a PDF Arranger here, I've not used that myself, and Plume Creator, which is writing software. I've never used it, but I have heard some good things about it. Under Science and Maths, we have a bit of LibreOffice Math, and we have Cyril, which I brought up in a previous video, thinking it is astronomical software, but I thought it was, sort of like a planetarium thing. No, it's actually for processing and editing pictures that you might take through something like a telescope. Say if you were trying to take a picture of, let's take the moon, for example. Everyone's taken a picture of the moon, and it looks great in person, and then they look at the picture, and the picture looks really bad. This should hopefully be able to, fix up any problems specific to taking pictures of, planetary bodies such as the moon, or, Jupiter, if your telescope is powerful enough. Then we have, basically everything in the settings is pretty typical, apart from we do have a thing for Wacom tablet finder if you use one of those, graphics tablets. Once again, it's the little things. You might not really consider needing it. Personally myself, I don't have one, but if you're installing Ubuntu Studio because you are a graphic designer, an artist, someone like that, someone that needs a very, very visual-based tool, you probably have one of these, and you really, really need to get it found by the computer and pre-configured and sorted out as quickly as you can, and that's why it comes pre-installed. Under System, it's what you typically find in an install of KDE Plasma. Apart from the bottom here, we have the Ubuntu Studio installer. Bearing that in mind, we're going to be talking about that a little bit later. Under Utilities, once again, it's pretty much all the same stuff that you just have in a typical KDE Plasma installation. Then we have the Ubuntu Studio Information category, which is useful to some people, not so useful to others. Basically, it's mostly just a load of web links to things like the mailing list, their website, things like that, a way to contribute if you want to contribute your code or your art or your money to the project. Something nice at the top is Ask Ubuntu, which is a website where you can basically, as the name implies, ask questions about Ubuntu and get answers. It's very, very useful if you're having any problems at all with the system. Okay, so that's basically everything you get with a fresh install of Ubuntu Studio 21.04. However, I have decided not completely to switch distribution, as I still count what I have installed as Ubuntu Studio. But as good as it is, and it is a very, very good desktop environment, I just prefer XFCE to KDE Plasma. So here's what I've done about that. I actually installed Xubuntu, which is the Ubuntu distribution that's just, standard Ubuntu but with XFCE. And I've actually installed the Ubuntu Studio installer. You go onto any Ubuntu, version, and then you just go sudo apt install Ubuntu Studio-installer, and you get this program here. And now this is what it looks like normally, but this is what mine looks like now, and as you can see it says all Ubuntu Studio packages are already installed. Basically, you get all those bits to the side, and you can sort of, it's kind of like a checkbox system, but it just highlights them or you unhighlight them. Basically, I decided just to click on all of them, because I wanted all of them, and I would just, uninstall certain packages here or there as I needed to, and then install selected packages. Then you will have to reboot, as it's going to replace the standard, or as it's written out, generic Linux kernel with the Linux low latency kernel, which once again is really, really good for audio as it reduces the amount of latency going into the system. And yeah, pretty much that works really well actually. There are a couple of little bits here or there I found to begin with. I had to like edit, like it changed my display size, but I just went back into the settings and fixed that really easily. And so now if I just hit the desktop, here we go. This is Ubuntu Studio, but it's actually, well, it was XFCE, but via installing all the Ubuntu Studio packages through the Ubuntu Studio installer, I've been able to turn this into a version of Ubuntu Studio that is actually running XFCE, despite not being the main version. And you can do this with any other version, such as, you know, the mainline GNOME version, or the LXQt, or the Mate version, anything like that. It can be Ubuntu Studio, but with your own desktop environment of choice. And so there we have it for this video. Ubuntu Studio remains my distribution of choice. Whether you see what I've done with Ubuntu or not as a different distribution, I see it as the way I have it now configured with all the Ubuntu Studio stuff that is just a continuation of the XFCE version of Ubuntu Studio. And yeah, what I'm going to be doing is in a couple of months' time, when this particular version, 21.04, is halfway through its life, I'll do a quick little review video of how I'm finding it. And if not, then the next video on the subject after that will be the 21.10 first look video. But if you've only just found my channel, please consider liking, sharing, and subscribing, and sticking around because I mostly do music and, you know, musician-heavy related videos. And I have a few recorded here or there that I'm going to be editing and releasing in the next few weeks and months or so. I've been a little bit behind schedule on YouTube at the moment, as I've been fairly busy, but as and when I can, I'm going to be editing up these videos and filming new ones and putting them out on my channel. And so, yeah, I hope you enjoyed, and if you did, please consider liking, sharing, and subscribing, and I shall see you in the next video. Goodbye!